Designing a grain facility isn't something you do often, but when you do, the decisions can shape performance for decades. From layout and grain flow to planning for a future expansion, the choices made early on can determine how efficiently and safely a facility operates long into the future. And sometimes the most valuable insights come from the lessons learned out in the field. All that and more coming up next. Welcome to the Whole Grain Podcast, where we champion, connect, and serve the global grain handling and processing industry. I'm your host, Jim Lenz, Director of Global Education and Training with GEAPS. The Grain Elevator and Processing Society serves as the global community and thought leader for the grain industry, which feeds, fuels, and clothes the world. This podcast brings together grain professionals from 111 countries from around the world, all focused on learning, growing, and strengthening their operations. Each episode is designed to deliver practical insights and real-world perspectives from the people shaping our industry. In today's episode, we're joined by Chris Schaudt, Vice President of Sales at Mid-State Companies, and we thank Mid-State Companies for participating in the GEAPS Partner Program. Now, Chris brings extensive experience supporting grain facility design, construction, and expansion projects from greenfield builds to modernizing existing operations. In this episode, we'll explore what it takes to design grain facilities that last, along with key lessons learned from real-world projects that can help operators make smart, more informed decisions. Let's get started. Today, we're diving into a topic that sits at the heart of every successful operation, designing grain facilities that don't just work today, but continue to perform for decades to come. Because most of our operators, decisions around facilities design, expansion, equipment aren't made often, but when they are, they matter. They matter a lot. And just as important as the design itself are the lessons learned along the way. Joining me today is Chris Schaudt, Vice President of Sales at Mid-State Companies. Mid-States has spent more than 20 years helping customers bring projects to life, from greenfield builds to expansion, repairs, and materials handling systems. Chris, welcome to the Whole Grain Podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. Glad to be on the show.
Chris, to get started, give our listeners a little background about your role and the various types of projects you and your team are working on today.
Yeah, so been with Mid-States. Actually used to work here in the shop growing up, so we've kind of got a vertically integrated approach here at Mid-States. My role today is Vice President of Sales on the front end of a lot of these capital projects that we're building across the country. And so with that, doing a lot of scope development, partnering with our clients to not just build something, but to partner alongside of them and come up with creative solutions to whatever problem they're trying to solve. We try not to be a transactional company. We want to be a relational company and build a relationship that's moving forward in the right direction, not just project in and project out, but really relationship focused and trying to help them solve their problems to the best of their ability and our ability. Starting back in 2016, I started here full time, and there's a large need for flat storage systems. And that was kind of my deal back in the day. I was kind of the bunker guy, you'd say, just building flat storage bunkers. Yeah, as I continued to gravitate towards some of those larger co-ops, larger end users that had a need for a lot more than just flat storage, I started spending a lot of time understanding the operational side of those facilities and what the issues they were having. And it was just a natural fit for me to continue to gravitate towards that and how that complements our business as well, with our design and engineering and fabrication, and then the millwright construction crews and the crane and trucking business that we have to support all those efforts. So yeah, today I spend a lot of time with clients just trying to come up with creative solutions to what they're trying to accomplish and bring together our full team here at Mid-States to help deliver that result together.
So that's great. Good depth and scope for you and both for the organization. So as you think about those projects that you're involved in today, what's changed over the past 5 to 10 years in terms of what customers are asking for or expecting?
Safety is huge when it comes to the clients we work for and what we're becoming. There's a huge emphasis on safety, and that goes from planning out safety as far as, how are we designing this facility, are we creating maintenance and service access points into this design that is conducive to safe operations once this thing gets turned on? And then also on the contractor side of the standpoint of, when we're on site, are we holding ourselves to a high safety standard and exceeding the customer's expectations when it comes to safety and communication, whether that be, dedicated safety leads on projects, depending on the scope, all of your compliance with lockout, tagout, hot work, lift inspections, critical lifts, working at heights, fall protection, all of those types of things, communicating daily with the client, working alongside of them. Because a lot of these facilities are older and they are needing to be brought up to today's standards from a safety standpoint and a throughput standpoint, getting more out of the asset than what it was originally designed, and doing that efficiently while they're still trying to operate day to day. Safety is a huge emphasis now, more than it ever has been, I think. And it's at the top of our list for what we want to deliver as a result. I mean, a successful project is a safe project. So
I'm sure our Whole Grain Podcast listeners are happy to hear that. Thank you for sharing that. Let's shift into our first focus area, designing grain facilities that last. For someone who's planning a new facility or a major upgrade, what are the most important things they should be thinking about before they even begin? I know you mentioned safety. You can dig into that deeper or other areas.
yeah, what we see often is, there's a need, there's a want, and there's also budget and what you can afford. And so we try to come alongside of these decision makers and help them navigate those waters of how do we get to where we need to go, say 10 years from now. We see the future growth of the business, but we only have a certain amount of dollars today to spend. How can we set that project up for success, knowing where we want to go, but we have to start somewhere. So we really try to think forward as much as we can and plan for the future, not knowing exactly what the future holds, but what we think it is today, and sizing of the equipment, sizing of the walkways, catwalks, towers. Are we putting in, 2 receiving pit conveyors today? Or are we pouring the basement for 2, but only installing 1? And making sure that we're not backing ourselves into a corner for when we are then going to that growth opportunity, say a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, we're paying twice as much as we should be because we didn't pre-plan for it. So I think just setting these up for success, not knowing exactly what the future holds, but there's a lot of things from a site development and site design standpoint that you can spend marginal dollars today to have a huge impact on the future to mitigate the excess cost in the future. So
that's great that you're there to support them and take that into consideration. But also on the same lines here, what do you see as some of the more common mistakes operators make early in that design process? Is it not thinking maybe forward enough in growth and thinking about cost savings potentially on what you're going to be building now and what you could continue to build in the future? What are those areas that you think are some of those most common mistakes?
We see there's a lot of opportunities that pop up that you'd like to execute on, but you just physically can't because it's completely scrapping old and replacing with new. So whether that be, hey, we got to fill this grain bin at 15,000 bushel per hour. And, in the future, we want to fill it at 30,000 bushel per hour, but we're just going to put in the catwalk and tower to support the 15,000 bushel per hour conveyor today. And what we find is, if we know that the end goal is to maybe add a second conveyor or, change out that conveyor for a different conveyor that's wider and taller and faster, to think about that up front and maintain proper walkways and serviceability and clearance accesses. Maybe you're taking that catwalk from a 7-foot catwalk to an 8-foot catwalk, and you're spending an extra $5,000 on a several $1 million project, versus spending $150,000 5 years from now and completely replacing. So we just see a lot of short-sightedness as far as what the next phase of the project is. Are we installing a catwalk completely level and not taking into account a bin top tower to then extend out to the second bin? With that, are we considering the future incline for that conveyor? Are we now changing horsepowers? Are we changing shaft sizes, chain sizes, all those kinds of things? So on the original build, if you're going from a 40 to a 50 horsepower motor or WH124 chain to 132 chain, very minimal cost. But when you're changing it out completely, we're really paying for the same thing twice in a short span of years. So try and always think about what's next and not just build for today.
Great. Talk a little bit about grain flow and layout. How should operators be thinking about that from the start?
Yeah, I think it starts with traffic flow, honestly. Even before we look at all the shiny stuff that goes vertical, grain bins and towers, we see a lot of, you've got a certain facility footprint that you're trying to work with. A lot of times you've got a neighboring field that maybe doesn't want to sell, and you're trying to build more on the space you've got. And sure, maybe you can do that. But if you go from dumping 100 trucks a day to 300 trucks a day, or 500 to 800, there's that many more trucks to get through, and you can have the speed to unload them and the space to fill it. But if you haven't thought about inbound and outbound truck scales and truck probes and sampling, all of those things that need to happen on top of dumping that truck and storing the commodity, you can really create other bottlenecks if you're not thinking holistically about the traffic flow. I was just at a feed mill the other day, and they're wanting to add some additional storage and speed and space and get a dedicated corn receiving pit separate from the ingredient receiving pits that they also receive corn at today. So, a 2 million bushel facility with a new 30,000 bushel per hour pit, it all sounds great. But when you increase that amount of trucks and you've only got one truck scale today that services both trucks and commodities for corn, you triple your truck traffic, and they all have to go on that same scale. Like, we can accomplish this over here, but if we don't think about the other areas, you're going to have upset customers, and they're going to continue to. You could build all the speed and space in the world, but if you can't get them in and out of the facility properly and efficiently, they're gonna continue to drive by you.
Yeah, it makes sense. Big picture, what's your footprint? And then you also have to think about traffic flow, like you said. Fantastic.
Yeah.
There's always a balance between upfront cost and long-term performance. How do you help customers think through that?
Yeah, we kind of, like I mentioned before, just talking through, here's and really it comes down to optionality. There's no hard and fast, this is the only answer. If you want to do this, this is exactly what you have to do. There's a lot of different avenues to go down when it comes to adding speed, adding space, adding flexibility, redundancy, reliability in these systems. So we really spend a lot of time on, we don't want any buyer to be a confused buyer, because then, there's too many things to consider, and now we're spinning our wheels. But we really like to break it down to here's really two options that we see. We do a lot of vetting ourselves from our experience with our designs, and here's option A, here's option B. Here's if we just satisfy today's needs with no consideration of the future. And here's if we consider, adding that additional bin, or adding that additional receiving lane, or adding that additional dryer capacity, or tying into the existing, feed mill on site versus trucking around the corn to dump at the feed mill. There's always an option there. We don't ever want to get to a point where it's a, hey, I told you so type of situation. But we want to put those options in front of the clients to say, this is if I was, if budget was not limited, this is what you could do. But if we're constrained to a budget, this is what you absolutely have to do to satisfy today's needs.
Here's a question I'm curious about. When you walk into a facility, a new facility, never been to, can you tell fairly quickly whether it was designed with a long-term in mind?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. We see a lot of, everybody's all about speed and space these days. If you're not getting the truck in off the road, across the scale, across the pit, and out the door in, under say, so a lot of these new facilities, 10 minutes. There's other guys that are doing it in under 10 minutes. So we see a lot of these older facilities that have had an old 5 or 10,000 bushel an hour receiving leg, and now we're cramming in a big 15 or 20,000 bushel an hour leg, and you've got a round tube tower that's probably already under designed from day one, and now it's really maxed out with, and probably exceeding the design with the new bucket elevator. And that's where we start seeing structural failures, just different things. Funny stuff starts happening when these older facilities are being asked to outperform what they were originally meant to. Really, it comes down to there's too much stuff crammed into a tight area. And sure, maybe it might be able to mechanically work, but there is no room anymore for service. There is no room for maintenance. If a motor or a bearing goes out, it's upright against a wall or it's up against a ceiling, and there was no forethought for whatever that piece of that equipment was to get bigger. And so now when a failure does happen, it's a more significant outage. And, it's the 911 phone calls are that much more urgent because it's not something simple to replace anymore.
I can only imagine. You must be thinking how frustrating that kind of scenario must be for the people who work there, not thinking about the long-term future. Let's move into something I think a lot of listeners will really enjoy, lessons from the field. You have a lot of different experiences. You've worked on a wide range of projects over the years. And when you look back, what are a few that really stand out?
Yeah, I'd say one of my favorite projects was at Mid-Iowa Co-op at, we call it Midway. It is in East Central Iowa, and it was directly impacted by the derecho. And that rolled through on, I think it was August 10th. My wife was 40 weeks pregnant with our fourth child. And that was a project in itself to maintain the family life and bring a newborn in with no power.
Oh, my.
But that project in particular, there were 605-foot diameter bins and a 60-foot wet bin. And the bins were, all but one of the bins was completely gone. One of the bins was leaned up against the leg tower. We had to replace tower sections in the middle of the air without stacking down the tower. So some very tricky installs, cutting the tops off of concrete foundations to pour new, more anchor bolts, and foundations were compromised beyond being able to be reused. So that project, though, was a shining star for us. I mean, we were managing about, at the peak, about 150 different contractor employees on site, including our own staff. We had the first bin fillable back in the second week of September, so about 4 weeks after the event occurred. And the client was able to take in all of the harvest bushels, ended up filling every single grain bin. That was about a 4 million bushel facility, 4.5 million bushel facility. So for a devastating event like that to occur right before harvest on August 10th, and then for us to receive 4.5 million bushels of harvest, corn and soybeans was one of my favorite projects I've worked on.
Great. A lot of facilities today are working with legacy infrastructure. What are some of the lessons learned when expanding or retrofitting older facilities?
Yeah, I think for us, never assume that old infrastructure is good to bolt on and add on to. Really need to spend a lot of time thinking about what risks are there before we come up with this design. Because when we come up with something shiny, fancy, new that the customer gets excited about, we need to make sure that the infrastructure there is good to support that. So working with our in-house team of engineering has been super helpful to do structural analysis prior to going into a full-on design, whether that be, analyzing a concrete silo roof deck. What kind of condition is that in today? Is it compromised today? Can we solve two problems with one new solution? Getting load out of areas where maybe it wasn't supposed to be, that's been added onto in the future, and cleaning that up. So we recently just did that on a project down in Texas where a series of 40,000 bushel an hour chain drag conveyors were intermittently supported throughout this bin roof deck, and a lot of penetrations, a lot of different pinch points and areas that weren't ever really designed to be loaded the way they were, and going in with a new design based on our engineered solution to free up that grain elevator roof that really owes the company nothing at that point. It's been standing there for 50 years and we need to get another 50 out of it. So how do we do that effectively with this new design and not max it out? So just starting with making no assumptions that the old is going to be able to support the new, and slowing down and taking the time to pre-plan with a little engineering up front.
Do you use drones for that ever?
We have some drones. We do a lot of 3D scanning in-house.
Oh, is that right?
And then we do like some ground penetrating radar, and then a lot of non-destructive testing. So we'll come out and we'll analyze how thick concrete is, where rebar is placed, what spacing it's placed, what the thickness of the structural steel is. We see a tube of steel, is it 1/4 inch thick or 5/16 inch thick? Things like that. Analyzing welds. Structurally, it could all be designed to support, but if it wasn't installed or fabricated the right way from day one, we need to go in and correct some of those issues that we might be finding throughout that process.
From your perspective, what separates a project that runs smoothly from one that becomes more difficult?
I think, a large portion of that is the pre-planning.
Mm-hmm.
A project that is not thought out well and set up for success before that shovel goes in the ground is going to struggle. You're always going to be playing catch up, and there's going to be a lot of things that are now you're forced to think about because the project's progressing, and that's when decisions start getting rushed. The timeline isn't moving at the end, and things start getting missed, things start getting overlooked, and then it's left to the field to determine, what the best possible outcome for that is versus, and it's always more expensive to do, in the field after the fact versus, in meetings and with engineering and design up front. So getting a clear scope, getting a clear engineered plan developed before that project kicks off, I think is huge.
And how important is communication then between the owner, the contractor, and the full team throughout the process?
Yeah, I think right behind safety, and communication is obviously a part of safety as well, but communication is going to, either help that project flourish or it's gonna make it that much more difficult to execute. So we at Mid-States, we've seen that as an issue in the industry. There's a lot of different construction management softwares out there, say Procore, for instance, and it's all shiny and it looks great from the outside. But there's only a few, contractors that are really willing to put in the work to actually use that as the tool that it's meant to be. We can send emails, we can upload documents other ways, and if you're just barely scratching the surface of some of those communication or construction software tools, you're not really doing it service. So we've implemented our own software through Acumatica, which is our ERP system. So all of our estimating gets done there. All of our project progress gets tracked in there. All of our safety forms get filled out in there. All of our daily man hours get reported in there that are being tracked down to the task level, whether that's unloading a conveyor, pre-building a conveyor, installing a conveyor. And all of that data essentially lives in our ERP system. And we have an on-site project manager who is responsible for logging all of that information correctly daily. That then gets released to our internal team at 11 o'clock that next day for the previous day's activities. And then it goes on to the client in the afternoon, like 4:30. So we are communicating daily with the clients through a very professional daily field report that shows exactly what the previous day's tasks were and what the next day's tasks are. So I don't think you can emphasize communication enough when it comes to a successful project. There's, dealing with, say, a large farmer, maybe, he's out there every day. He's writing the check. It's on his property. He can touch and feel and see everything daily. A lot of times, these clients that we're dealing with, they have their corporate office somewhere, and we're working, 6 states away from where they're located at. And they only have so much time in their schedules that allow them to visit the site. So if we can essentially, over communicate daily on exactly the work that's getting done with photos associated with that, and then have weekly client meetings as well, where we're kind of rounding the troops together. And here's what we got done last week. Here's what the 2 week look ahead looks like. And these are our roadblocks, or this is where we're at on the project. So communication's huge.
Chris, I can sense that in your voice, certainly in your diction, your choice of words there. That is such an important part for you and your organization. Like you just used as a metaphor analogy here about farmers, they know what's going on day-to-day operations. But when you are working on projects and with people, stakeholders who are not there daily and as you said, maybe many states away, it's difficult to lose that. But you even used the word over-communication and looked at the software that you use. So you effectively communicate that question on communication. Well done, Chris.
Yeah, thanks.
And just to conclude here on lessons from the field, you come with such great experience, and listeners appreciate that. So one final question in that area, and I would imagine just based on what you said, every project there's something to learn, right? But was there ever a particular project or a moment that had a substantial impact in how you think about facility design?
Going back to the derecho and how that really changed my thought process on facility design, specifically talking about and filling them. So you've got multiple methods to fill a grain bin. You can fill it with a spout off a bucket elevator. You can fill it with an auger. You can fill it with a drag conveyor, belt conveyor, all of those things. But specifically talking about catwalks and material handling systems to fill them, we saw through the derecho the need for freestanding support towers. So on the front side of things, these grain bins externally stiffened, relatively easy to bolt up a two-legged support tower and brace it back to the bin and support the catwalk that way. Obviously, less cost, a little bit easier to install maybe, but at the end of the day, if that grain bin goes down, it's pulling that tower down with it, and therefore, pulling the catwalk down as well. So on the flip side of that, you can have a freestanding support tower. So a four-legged tower, completely separate from the grain bin foundation, completely separate from the grain bin, not tied to the grain bin whatsoever, and a catwalk that is then spanning across that grain bin to another tower, versus utilizing that bin roof to support the catwalk. In situations like that, where in the derecho, the facility I mentioned at Mid-Iowa Co-op at Midway, it was freestanding support towers with box trusses above that did not tie into the bin roof. And that was a huge part of the success of that project, was being able to maintain the whole structural fill system and re-erect that grain bin below, where other facilities where there were two-legged towers braced to the grain bin, when those grain bins went down, it pulled everything down with it, and they completely missed harvest. So from a facility design, freestanding support towers and catwalks that span grain bins has a huge upside if you do have a loss event in a windstorm that comes through and the grain bin goes down, you have a much higher chance of being able to use that grain bin shortly thereafter. And then from the insurance side too, there's less loss from an insurance provider, and hopefully you're not getting into then business interruption as well. So getting back to an operating state quicker with less exposure for the insurance company. So we were asked by an insurance company to do an analysis on a 105 mile per hour rated grain bin versus 140 mile per hour rated grain bin. And the cost to do that is so high from the grain bin manufacturer. The summary was, it came back to the design of the facility and the freestanding support towers versus two-legged support towers braced back to the bin. Much better money spent there versus a higher rated grain bin that is when it's empty is still going to be at a high risk of failure in those wind events.
Fantastic. Let's shift to a brief segment about practical advice. I mean, for the operators listening to this episode of the GEAPS Whole Grain Podcast, many of them may only go through a project like this once or maybe twice in their career. What advice would you give them?
Well, mid states. No. Um, I would say just, yeah, slow down and harvest comes once a year. If you were thinking about doing a project, yesterday was the right time to be starting to think about it. The more time you can give yourself, the better to come up with those solutions. We'll get plenty of people that'll call in May, June and want something done for harvest. And if it's a substantial project, a lot of times those are they're hard to fit in. And then you're kind of left with, okay, this is really the only option we have because for whatever reason, the decision was delayed and the options to come together with a solution are very limited at that stage. So the sooner you can start talking about what those options could be, the better. Yeah, I think just getting good sound advice early on.
Great advice. Thank you very much. All right, as we look ahead here, Chris, what do you think the next generation of grain facilities will need to do differently?
Yeah, I mean, as crazy as it sounds, automation and AI and all those things are here and changing very quickly. Um, and I was just with a past customer of mine that's moved on to develop an autonomous robotic truck probe. You know, why go to the fuel station and you can fuel up your car 24 hours a day unmanned. Why are we not doing it in the grain elevator? So I think there's going to be a lot of automation, there's going to be a bigger drive for less manpower on site, less people at risk of injury, getting people out of those monotonous day-to-day, high risk environment, and replacing with automation and safer facilities. So I don't know what that looks like as far as self-driving semis. That still seems like a ways out there. But just thinking about if automation continues to advance, how are we going to adapt when it comes to handling the grain and making sure that visions for that in these designs.
Are there any trends in design, automation, or capacity that you're paying close attention to?
Yeah, the automation side is really driving a lot of the front end project development that we're doing. So making sure that we have the right infrastructure getting built that will be able to then be automated and making sure that we're not building and installing something that it is not going to communicate well with automation on the backside. So there's a huge emphasis on automation when it comes to running the facility, getting operators out of harm's way, the control rooms, the HMI screens, placement, all of those types of things, and how we're controlling those devices in the field. So whether it's, limit switches, just the mechanical side of it, if you don't set it up well for success from an infrastructure and mechanical standpoint, it's going to be harder to control on the automation side. So knowing what that automation software is, what kind of IO points there are, and thinking critically about how can we make this as smart as we can without going way over in the road ditch and breaking the bank. There's some pretty unique solutions out there to be able to have a very, robust and easy to operate automation system without having to do all the fancy bells and whistles. So
I think that's interesting when you think about automation. There's a lot of aspects to consider and what it impacts. It can consider obviously safety, inventory management, quality management systems, and then the challenge that some facilities have in terms of finding curious, quality, hardworking employees, right? Doesn't that have an impact on that and more?
Yeah, that's a common theme. It's always hard to find good help. And so, and the good help is getting sought after by the next guy as well. So creating an environment where you can be in an air conditioned room controlling the truck receiving area versus out in the truck receiving area pushing buttons and pulling cables and things like that. A lot easier to go with option one and retain an employee there versus having a more manual set of tasks to do out in a hazardous, dusty environment. So yeah, it's from the top to bottom, setting it up for success on the planning side and implementing a little automation. We see a lot of our clients are able to retain employees a lot better when spend a little bit more money up front to create a better work environment.
Sounds great. For those folks in high school, they may be surprised, and of course outside of high school, who may not be part of the agricultural community ever, which is largely becoming more and more the case, who are working in grain facilities. They may be surprised how technologically savvy one can be and work to be in terms of working with grain elevators with all these tools that are out there with automation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you're thinking about quality by design, what does that really mean going forward? And when you think about the idea of quality by design, what does that mean going forward?
Yeah, I think again it starts at safety. I mean, if you can do a lot of things. You can dump trucks fast and you can store a lot of grain and you can do it safely or unsafely. And a lot of that is dictated by the design of the facility and how it was set up from day one. I think quality starts with a safe and efficient design, but not losing sight of the objective that we're still here to receive and store and transfer and, process and mill, but doing it with safety at the forefront. And with that, trying to de-bottleneck from the get-go as well. I mean, like we mentioned earlier, just thinking about the future and not knowing exactly what that brings, but try to do our best to not build just for today's scope and look for future as well in the decisions that we're making.
Thank you so much. And in closing here, Chris, I just want to say it's been a great conversation because you brought really practical insights for really anyone thinking about building, expanding, or improving a grain facility. And so this episode brings that great perspective. And there's a lot to consider. And so you brought a lot of good conversation. I'm sure that they'll share with folks in their facility, in their organization. So if listeners, though, want to learn more about Mid-States companies or connect with your team, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so if you could reach out to us on our website, and we've got a great portfolio of past projects that we've done on there and where we're currently working and kind of highlighting all of our different services that we offer. You always reach me by my cell phone or email. Be prompt at getting back to you. But yeah, and then we're also out at a lot of these different shows. We're going out to IAOM next week. We'll be at the FEW conference, Convey, this summer as well. So I'm sure we'll cross paths somewhere. And of course, we have GEAPS Exchange, annual event in February of every year. You and your team played a big role in making that a success. And it's a great way for people to connect. And like you said earlier in the conversation, you are not transactional. You and your team want to have a strong relationship. You're problem solvers trying to work together and partner. So that's a great work. And you're a great representative of the Mid-States companies. Thank you very much for making time in your day to connect with Whole Grain Podcast listeners. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
We thank Chris for joining us today and for sharing his experience and insights. There's a lot here that can help our listeners think differently about how they approach facility design and long-term planning. As you reflect on this with your colleagues, consider this. What decisions are you making today that will shape the performance of your facility for the next 10, 20, or even 30 years? And how can you ensure those decisions support not just efficiency, but also safety, flexibility, and long-term success? If you'd like to learn more about Mid-State companies and the work they're doing across the grain industry, you can visit their website at midstatescompanies.com. We thank Mid-States for participating in the GEAPS Partner Program. And as always, we encourage you to explore the many resources available through GEAPS, the Grain Elevator and Processing Society, whether it's training, courses, credentials, or connections across the industry, such as chapter events at GEAPS.com. That's GEAPS.com. Thank you to our listeners around the world for tuning in. We now have listeners from 111 different countries. So thank you, grain professionals. Continue spreading the word to others and your colleagues in the industry for this show. It's a great opportunity to connect with so many. We thank you for being part of this global community of grain professionals. Until next time, keep learning, stay connected, and continue moving the grain industry forward. My name is Jim Lenz, Director of Global Education and Training with GEAPS. Make it a great day.